Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Tonight's talk is mostly about the posher medieval gardens and some of the plants that were grown, and a look at the general overview of a medieval garden, really up until the very late medieval period. Now, according to the Bible was literally the truth, and the Garden of Eden shows a very plain, simple garden, more of a park-like area, where there were trees that were good to look at and good to eat. And here we see a rather lovely garden, the Duke de Berry's Book of Hours, showing Eve being tempted by a rather, and Eve's being tempted, she in turn tempts Adam, and they're both kicked out of the Garden of Eden, forever to have to work their bread by the sweat of their brow. Now, the garden is enclosed, as many medieval gardens would have been. There's a gate to restrict access, and a rather wonderful fountain in the middle, which may look rather fanciful, but if you think about the Eleanor crosses, it's not so different to those. And Holy Well in North Wales, a very medieval well, and it's quite similar to the bottom part, even if it's covered by a building. According to Albertus Magnus, the gardens for pleasure, and they're not for the usefulness of the herbs and the fruits, but they're simply there to be enjoyed for the colour of the flowers, the scents, and the pleasure of being outdoors on a nice sunny day. Now, surprisingly, some medieval gardens have survived in part. This is on the island of Tintagel, where the castle is. Very few people ever come across it because it's in the middle and not well marked. But it does appear to be the site of a genuine medieval castle. The walls have been restored, but it is very similar to Albertus Magnus's description of a medieval garden. He says that there should be lawns in the middle, and around the outside edge there will be small flower beds, which you can see on the lower right-hand side as you look at this. You can see the wall and edge of stone, and that's where the flowers would have been grown. We don't know what would have been grown here, probably nothing too fanciful, because with all the sea winds and the salt spray, very few plants would survive very easily. But it would be a nice, pleasant place to go, away from the rigours of the hustle and bustle of the castle itself. No, it's frozen up. That's better. But all of it, just make sure that's it. Medieval gardens don't appear out of the blue. The Romans invade. This is Fishbourne down on the south coast, not so far from Chichester. Though the model shows the villa as originally being on the coast itself, nowadays it is some distance inland, and a lot of it is buried under a housing estate, so you won't see the complete site as it was. But the model gives you a good example of how it would have been. The Romans were excellent gardeners. They wrote many books that were later used by medieval clerics, especially to get their ideas for gardening on how to look after the gardens. The Romans, being good gardeners, quickly realised that the chalk of the south coast is not good for growing plants. So they excavated trenches backfilled with decent soil and then grew their hedges. We don't know the appearance of the hedges themselves, but at least we can see the outline, and they did plant box hedging in the original trenches for some idea of the original appearance. The St. Gall plan comes from Northern Europe. It is a plan of an ideal monastery. Everything you could possibly need is included in here. We have school, we've got the abbot's house, a hospitum for distinguished guests, and another one for less distinguished guests elsewhere. But we have a set of gardens along the right-hand side of the screen. So right at the top.
You need to take that or not really?
Somebody's just coming in again, please. The doctor's house is at the top, and next to that is a little physic garden. Now, I originally thought this was going to be lots of exotic plants, hard to get hold of, and probably rather poisonous, but many of them are quite simple plants that were commonly available at the time. At the bottom, we have another garden with the gardener's house and his tool shed next door to it, listing some vegetables. Now, many of these vegetables would actually have been grown out in the field systems rather than within a monastery at the time, because the monastery garden would simply not be big enough to support anybody. It includes peas and beans. These were used as a source of protein and generally dried for winter use rather than being used when they were fresh. And many of the salad crops that are also there would go into pottage along with your peas and beans as a staple diet for most people throughout the period. Next to the gardens are some hen houses and duck houses, and so any spare leaves and perhaps your slugs and whatever could be lobbed over to the poultry to fatten them up. The part I like is just above that garden, the cemetery. This is in fact an orchard, so the idea of green burials is much older than many people would probably suspect, because this is where the monks get buried. So nice bit of fertilizer for the trees as well. There are apples and pears. These will be made into perry and cider. Very little fruit is eaten fresh, even through the Tudor period. There are peaches, probably more unlikely to be grown in the northern parts of Europe. Almonds, hazelnuts are being grown. These are again a good source of protein, and if the pests nibble them, it doesn't really matter an awful lot. And there are quinces, figs, and medlars. So these are also grown in many of the high status gardens later in the period. We have a similar plan from what is now Canterbury Cathedral. This is a plan of the waterworks. At the bottom left-hand picture, you can see there's a little ziggy-zaggy line. It's running through cornfields, it goes through vineyards, then orchards. This is the water going into the cathedral precinct. It's taken up the left-hand side to a pool where the fish are kept, and the upside-down flowers indicate yet another burial ground, this time for the lay brothers. And then the water is taken to a water tower from where it can be distributed across the rest of the abbey for various different uses, such as washrooms and anything else you possibly could need water for. And then you can see the little lines going around and back out again. The water tower still exists and is in a reasonable state of repair. And according to somebody I spoke to, if they cleaned the pipes out, it would still probably work. Another influence for the medieval gardens is from the Crusades. The Normans have hardly been in the country before they're off again fighting out in the Middle East. They're going overland quite a lot of the time, passing through Constantinople, the last eastern part of the Roman Empire. They still consider themselves to be Romans, and they had the technology that the Romans had. So these gardens are a lot more advanced than many of the ones back in the rest of Europe. They have water features. They even have automata where water is powering little tableaus and things. So very, very advanced. The Crusaders then carry on into the Arab-controlled areas. The Arabs were also well known for gardening. And perhaps one or two of the surviving Crusaders, when they get home, probably did the same as tourists did in the early 70s when they went to Spain. They start copying things they've seen abroad. This is the Alhambra in southern Spain, which was under Arab control for quite some time. The layout is as it was built, but the plants are now mostly ones that are available in more modern times, rather than any set historical period. Little poet's Narcissus is said by some up in Derbyshire, being brought back to England by Geoffrey de Findon, and is still known locally as the Findon lily, and it grows quite wild in the areas. It's not a native plant, so the story is possibly true, but if it isn't, it's still a rather nice romantic story. Now, another site of a medieval garden is up at Whittington, not far from Oswestry, just off what was the old A5. And I'm standing up on a mound looking out over the flat grass area of where they think the garden possibly was. This is a reconstruction of how it may have been. This is the reconstruction itself is made up from several different manuscripts to give some idea of how a garden could have appeared. Sadly, most of the castle is gone. The mound is still there, and it does have nowadays a little sort of summer house built of wood on top of it, so similar to the picture. And the gatehouse survives. The water would have been there to impress people and make the building stand out as much as for defence, but at this point, you could plonk a cannon on the side and smash this castle to smithereens without even worrying about any water. And this is another interpretation of how the garden may have appeared. The archaeologist Peter Brown has requested that English Heritage let him carry out some digs, but they won't even let him use geophys, so a lot of it is conjectural. Also not that far away, but over in the Welsh side of the border is Sycharth Castle. This belonged to Owain Glendower, and one of the famous poems by his court poets describes the wonderful gardens, orchards and fish ponds that were there. Sadly, during his revolt, the English completely destroyed everything, and this is literally all there is now, just humps, bumps and good views. Closer to home at Rockingham Castle, we have the site of Queen Eleanor's garden. There are records of Queen Eleanor having a garden built beneath the room which she tended to lodge in. The garden has no description of how it would have appeared. The chances are this would have been accessible only by going through the Queen's room so she could control who was there. Sadly, there seem to be no archaeological excavations or other research to prove any potential layouts. Clerics were often quite keen on the idea of a hortus conclusus, an enclosed garden based on the idea of the Song of Songs. So Mary is shown in the garden, usually with the baby Jesus, sometimes with several female saints. The garden will be fully enclosed. This picture is exceptional in that it gives a view out from the garden. Most do not. The ladies are sitting on a turf seat and the turf itself, which is full of wildflowers, doing the sort of things that high-class ladies would have done in the finer weather when they were outdoors. And gradually, the idea of the enclosed garden with Mary in it becomes sort of completely symbolic with Mary as well. And there are lots of pictures similar to this one that show Mary and her association with gardens. So in the bottom left, we have the little hortus conclusus. It's surrounded by trellis fencing and divided up. Very typical layout of the time. There is a practical fountain just above that. This is your daily use of water. And over on the right-hand side, there's the garden, the fountain of the garden, which is much more elaborate. And we have roses and lilies, plants much associated with Mary. This is a wonderful little model of Mary in her garden as the Archangel Gabriel comes to tell her that she's going to give birth to the baby Jesus. This is from a reliquary. It's in the Fitzwilliam Museum at Cambridge, and is only about 4 or 5 inches long at most. And in Northampton Museum of Leathercraft, there is this leather-covered reliquary with Mary in the garden. You can sort of see the dotty bits, which are supposed to be the trellis fence at the bottom, and some of the plants surrounding Mary, who stands with the baby Jesus in the middle. One of Mary's flowers is the Madonna lily. It is usually held by the Archangel Gabriel as he approaches Mary to tell her that she'll give birth to Jesus, or sometimes there's a pot of lilies close by. The Venerable Bede said that the white petals represent the bodily purity of the Virgin Mary, and the anthers the glow of her Holy Spirit. Any florists amongst you will know that that pollen stains like mad, So this could be put to practical use as a paint to represent gold. And if you have a cough and cold over the winter months, you could use the lily bulbs as a form of cough mixture, but there are many other plants I'd rather use for cough mixtures than digging up the rather precious lilies. One thing that the medieval people in England did not have was the lily beetle, so they wouldn't have had holes in the petals as these lilies do. The idea of a sacred lady in the garden gradually crosses over into the secular world, and we now have enclosed gardens of love. The Romance of the Rose was a medieval bestseller. It was never originally completed and finished off later on. The original version is very much more restrained and is about a lover's quest through a garden to pick the rosebud, his beloved. The later edition sort of goes downhill somewhat. At least they finish the story. So here we can see Lady Idleness dressed in a green dress. The green dress represents the slightly dodgier side of her personality. She is admitting the lover, dressed in blue, into the garden. Access is strictly restricted. Even if you want to sneak in where the water comes out, you can't, because they put a grill there just to make sure. He wanders into the garden. There are lots of little raised beds, as you would find in a medieval garden. The fruit trees look rather exotic. Some appear to be oranges, although this is a fantastical garden. You can do what you like when you get there. But people are enjoying themselves, playing music and enjoying the good weather. And if you look at the fountain itself around the outside, one very realistic touch is that the artist has drawn the staples which held the blocks together. So you would drill a hole in each block close to the join, pour in boiling lead, and then drop a metal staple in, and it would hold it nice and secure. The partner picture to that one shows people again out in a fairly sort of park-like garden, lots of trees for shade, and they're simply enjoying the dancing. And these small park gardens are shown quite a lot from illuminations. There will also be lots of flowers in the grass, ideally at least, and the Millefleur tapestries, which literally mean lots of flowers, show the representation of many sorts of flowers, often quite easily identified, but all flowering at once. In reality, you can never get all the flowers doing what they're doing. In the tapestries, it is an illusion. But in this particular picture, the lady is using a medieval watering pot to water a pot of rather exotic, fanciful flowers in an extremely expensive flower pot. The idea of the pot is you immerse it in water. There are holes in the bottom rather than the sides, as in this illustration. And when the bubbles stop, you place your fingers around the neck, thumb over the hole in the top, lift it up. And when you lift your thumb, the water falls out onto whatever you wish to water. And these parkland gardens are also places where you can carry out the rituals of courtly love. The most famous set of tapestries are the so-called unicorn tapestries at the Cluny Museum in Paris. They show lots and lots of different flowers. There are many sorts of animals out in this garden. The monkey might seem rather fanciful, but these were found in some of the medieval gardens in England. And the monks at Battle Abbey certainly had a monkey because there's an expense account for his chain to stop him running away. The tree on the right-hand side is a date palm, and this could have been grown in some of the warmer parts of France until it got hit by the hard weather, but they're not particularly difficult to grow from a stone. And this is the flowery mead we initially had at the Prebendal Manor. Northamptonshire heavy clay and its very vigorous and tough grasses are not ideal for flowery meads, so this only survived for a few years. And if you thought hot tubs was something rather new, well, think again. This is a German manuscript showing a man out in the garden. He's got his hot tub, somebody's blowing up the fire to make sure the water stays warm, and he's being served drinks while he's there. We have many illustrations showing how the gardens may have appeared, and sometimes we can recognise plants. So what do we do about sourcing the rest of the plants that were grown? Well, the Capitulare de Villis is shown on the right-hand side. This was drawn up by Charlemagne about the 8th century. He travels from estate to estate all across his empire, and he wants to know whenever he arrives at an estate, everything he needs is going to be there. So of course he wants plants for food, medicines and whatever. Unfortunately, it is only a list. They don't say what these plants are for. They, of course, knew perfectly well what the plants were going to be used for. It does leave us with some quandaries, but it does include roses, lilies and iris. Some have said that these were simply for show and pretty garden flowers, but they all have medicinal and other uses too. Some of the early herbals show rather weird pictures to illustrate the plants. These books originate from ancient Greece and later Rome. They spread across Europe, being copied and recopied. So it's hardly surprising over the centuries, perhaps the pictures themselves become rather more fanciful. Once artists start drawing from life, as you can see from the top picture, then they are much more accurate. We can recognise there are strawberries, there's borage flowers, little pansies, violets, aconitums, and even the insects themselves are rendered very accurately. Now, for the poorer people, many of them would have their own little plot extending out from the road. So this is a later map from Nassington. You can see the main roads going up the centre across the middle of the picture and going up to the Prebendal Manor itself with the church opposite, and all the little Virgate strips running off either side. And most of these gardens do in fact survive to this day. And you can also see the close where the fish ponds are as well. We don't get many pictures showing how the poorer people live, but this is a part of a picture. We're peering over the top of the disciples, and we can see that in the middle of there's a thatched cottage. It has its rectangular raised beds set out there with hedging around it. A very similar picture of a garden over to the right-hand side as well. Now, the raised beds were quite practical. Albertus Magnus, brain's gone completely dead. No, sorry. There's an early writing by Strabo describing how he gets his mattock to dig up all the weeds, and he then makes raised beds, and he places planks around them to stop the rain washing the soil away. So these are very practical. We don't have weeding forks and digging forks and trowels at this period. So once the beds have been prepared, you really don't want to be digging on them, so you can work from the sides. Much the same reason as we have raised beds for today. Here we can see people planting out. They have plants held in little baskets, and some of them are using their aprons as a container while they start planting, and they simply scooping out the hole with their hands to drop the plants in, much as I did when I was a child. At the back, there are more raised beds, and down the sides there are covered walkways, and then in the centre there, a gloriette or summer house. This picture has the front wall removed so we can peer into the garden. You can see straight away that there's a gatehouse at the back to restrict entry. We have plants around the base of the wall, with a lawn in the middle, flower beds in the middle, but this particular picture is quite good for showing you various types of plant supports that are being used. The lady, who looks rather well dressed to be out doing the gardening on the hands and knees, is tending to a plant that appears to have a support that's shaped rather like a crown. Behind her, there's a sort of triangular affair with what appears to be either a cross or perhaps a spread eagle there. And then one or two other supports look more typical of the sort of thing we would have today. For seating, it might seem rather odd that they didn't use wooden benches, but there are never any shown in pictures, and people sit on turf seats. Now, this picture shows vertical sides of grass. In reality, it's virtually impossible to get this to grow properly. I did do an experimental version of this, and you had to have a slope of at least sort of 50 degrees before the grass even started to grow. But there are records from the medieval times of turf seats being repaired just before the owner's going to be there for some time, and maybe that's all they expected. The little herbers or the flower gardens themselves might sound as if they're going to be rather boring and very geometric, but once the plants start growing up, as you can see in this picture, the effect can be much looser. Certainly many of the plants are scented and have very nice colourful flowers, so it would be a very pleasant place to have been. This is a recreation of Henry the Poet's garden at Prebendal Manor. Henry was a cleric in London, and he describes his garden as having 4 sides with about 25 plants in each. So the effect of perhaps a cloister garden. So this is one way of recreating that idea. He includes things such as bindweed and nettles, which we definitely didn't want growing in this garden because they're growing elsewhere. But this would have been his show garden and plants that he would have used for research and medicines, as well as being fairly pretty in some cases. These railed herbers are shown from this latter end of the 15th century, and by the Tudor period, they start putting paint on them to make them more decorative throughout the year. And in this particular instance, except for one bed, we were mostly growing plants of all the same type in each bed, as that's what the illustration of the time was showing. Oops, I've gone the wrong way, straight out that. And the trellis fencing is shown in many illustrations. This dates back to the Roman period. It's shown in some of the paintings that have survived from places like Pompeii. You could have wattle fencing made of interwoven willow or hazel rods, similar to the little garden we saw from the reliquary at Fitzwilliam. And there would often be fountains and topiary there too. This illustration is the one that they used at Winchester to create their medieval garden for Queen Eleanor. It shows the raised trellis at the back with red and white roses growing on it. There's a tunnel walkway, which you can see. There's a tree for shade. And this will be there so that the Lady Emily, who's sitting in the garden, can preserve her pale complexion. This is a sign of your status. Wealthy ladies like to be pale and pasty sort of looking, because only the peasants go out getting reddened by the wind and browned by the sun. So again, her turf seat is shown as having vertical sides of grass. When they tried this at Winchester, they soon realised it wouldn't work, and they later replaced the sides with brick. There's a raised bed at the back through the little arch there, and at the front they have a double row of trellis fencing to support the pinks. And medieval ladies are often shown sitting in gardens, making little circlets of flowers, most typically roses. And this is an example of some that I tried out. They do not last very long, perhaps only a few hours so at most, but it doesn't really matter because there'll be plenty of other roses coming on while you are able to make them, because they're quite floriferous. The one on the right-hand side is made out of local wildflowers. This one actually dried quite successfully and kept for quite a few months. I'm never quite sure why this person is about to be murdered, but the picture does show various forms of little raised beds, edged with little tiny fences, and also illustrates one of the queries of medieval gardens. Lots of the pictures show flowers as if they appear to be growing in grass. having tried this, I found it doesn't really work. You're constantly cutting back the grass, and most of the plants don't really thrive. So another suggestion is perhaps instead of grass, this just represents other low-growing plants. And at the back behind the man, you can see a medieval estrade, a form of topiary that was quite common. And here we can see them again. They are shown in the picture on the left as being in small little beds. There are 3 layers. Sometimes the top one is round, but not necessarily so. I've never yet seen one that is more than 3 layers, so maybe they are there to represent the Trinity. And they're often shown with little plant supports, as you can see in the picture on the right. This is a larger picture showing one of the supports. If you look closely at the bottom support, you can get the impression it looks a little bit like a push bike wheel with a piece of cotton taken off. You can see a groove and then little round dots where the spokes sort of go. So this could be made quite simply by splitting a piece of cane, pulling it round, tying it in place, and then placing it over the plant so that you have something to train it against. Now, I've grown many of these estrades without any supports whatsoever, so you don't really need them, but they do probably give you something to look at while the plant is being trained out. And these little estrades are often shown also being grown in flower pots. And this is one of the first ones we made at Nassington. So this was simply a small yew tree that we bought from a local nursery and then just cut it and trimmed it until we got the shape that we were after. Now, there were plants being grown in flower pots. They often use baskets as well. And in this particular scene of the Annunciation, you can see pots in the window. If you look at the one on the right-hand side, you can see the little hole, that dark splodge near the base. And this is copying the design of Roman flower pots, where the holes tend to be around the bottom on the outside upright part, rather than just in the middle of the bottom, because this makes for better drainage. And here are pots, claimed to be flower pots from the Pope's Palace in Avignon. The one on the left-hand side certainly could be quite easily adapted as a flower pot. The one on the right, I'm never quite so sure about. It could have been used perhaps for cut flowers or growing bulbs through, rather than just as a flower pot. And here are 2 examples. The pot on the left is modern, but it seems quite typical of most flower pots. The pot on the right-hand side is Beverley ware, so it's definitely English. You can see the drainage holes on the side and little birdie beaks sticking out. And there are 3 big lugs. And it is now thought that this is a sort of pot that would have been suspended on cords from some sort of hanger, much the same as the macrame hangers that were quite popular during the 70s. If you are very wealthy, you may have something like this basil pot, which is now on display at Waddesdon. Certainly in England, this would have been brought in from abroad and would have cost a lot of money. And just to show nothing's really new, this is a picture from Paris in about the 14th century showing a window box looking much the same as window boxes today. Now, many of these paintings are from abroad, and this is one of the 2 English paintings I've found that were actually painted in England rather than abroad and then imported. So we can see a king and a queen sitting on an open turf seat, playing a game of chess. There's a little flower bed running against a paling fence, and there's ground around them is sort of a flowery mead. Over to the left and towards the back, we can see a gardener who is pruning a shrub using his billhook. This one is from the Luttrell Psalter, so even closer to home. It shows a couple sitting in a turf seat, but in this particular instance, rather than the seat being raised, it appears to be sunk into the ground. I've never seen any other picture like this one. It's obviously a lot easier to sink a hole than it is to build things up and look after things. But this is floating around the outside edge of a page, so it has absolutely no relation to anything else. And of course, it's not even mentioned in the text. But this is probably my favourite turf seat. It's from France. There are individual seating places for separate couples. Minstrels stand on the side playing music, while everybody else in the middle is able to have a dance. This is the turf seat at Nassington. The roses have been trained up over the trellis, and this is backed up against a wall, and also the dovecot on a very nice warm day when the roses are in full bloom. The scent is trapped within. In fact, it used to be a little bit overpowering at times. You could sit out there on a nice fine day with trestle tables. You could be served food and drink, maybe a minstrel to entertain you. And the other picture shows a reenactment society where the ladies are making their own little headdresses, but rather than from roses, in this instance, it was periwinkle. This was my early attempt at making a turf seat. You can see it in the back. It's horseshoe shaped. It is simply stacked turfs. It survived for quite some time until rabbits, sheep and children finally finished it off. Now, another form of turf seat has a tree growing out the middle of it, and this is for shade, and many of them are shown in rural settings. Perhaps they're for travellers or workers to rest while they have something to eat. This is another one in the garden setting, much finer, more delicate. You can see flower beds behind the people. And although benches may not be constructed of wood, whatever, as sort of movable features in gardens, the tables often do seem to be permanent and set out and left there. Perhaps this one looks as if it may be made of some form of stone. My favourite turf seat base is this one. This is set within either a walled garden or perhaps a town, and it shows St. Sebastian being shot to pieces, tied against a tree, but the base is rather ornately carved. And this was the one we made at the Prebendal Manor. The bottom was made of stone, which we had a plentiful supply of. It's effectively a raised bed with the tree in it. And this particular tree is the Glastonbury thorn, the one said to have been brought to Glastonbury by Joseph of Arimathea. He's staggering up Wearyall Hill with his staff. He's a bit tired. He leans on his staff and it instantly bursts into flower and leaf. The Glastonbury thorn does flower mainly in the spring. It's very much hawthorn-like to look at. You wouldn't really tell the difference. But in the winter months, it will also flower. It used to be around about Christmas time until they changed the calendar in 1752, and it sort of moved back a week into the new year. Some people say they only flower twice at Glastonbury, whereas this one, I can vouch, has flowered several times during one season. Another form of little tree seat is this one shown at the back of the picture over towards the left, where somebody has simply planted a row of trees together and cut back into the tree to provide shade. And this was recreated at Nassington using a very suitable hawthorn bush that was overlooking the fish ponds. I usually allowed it to flower because the scent was absolutely wonderful, and then after that it could be clipped into a more formal shape. The tunnel arbor is effectively a nice pergola. These have certainly existed since the Roman times. Some of the earlier medieval ones seem to be made of perhaps chopped tree saplings, which have been placed into the ground, pulled over, tied, and have horizontal runners placed on them. These are very, very flimsy. They've got a life expectancy of perhaps 5 years or so at most. And you'll train roses, perhaps honeysuckles and other plants over the top, create shade. So on a nice hot day, the ladies can walk beneath this in the centre of the flowers and keep their precious pale complexion. Sometimes they're shown as more just protection over a seat. Again, this is Mary in the garden. Jesus is often represented as a grapevine. So here we have grapes growing over the top, but the white roses represent purity and the purity of the Virgin Mary herself. Sadly, the tunnel arbor at Nassington didn't last as long as the people who supplied the wood said it would. It should have lasted at least 25 years, but sadly rotted before it did. This was made of carpenter's wood, so it is much stronger and more long-lasting. There are grapes, roses, and honeysuckles trained over the top for the shade. And down the middle, we had Hesperus, Dame's rocket or sweet rocket down the side. That's the purple white flowers. There were ferns, Solomon's seal, and lots of little wild strawberries and sweet woodruff. So a very pleasant place to walk. That took you out into the nut walk, which from there you could get out to the hollowed out hawthorn tree. This shows a couple in a garden, probably newly betrothed. This time we're looking at the fountain. Now, although it doesn't show water coming out the top, if you look closely, it looks like the little mannequin that you can see in Brussels, and I suspect that's probably how he would have worked as well. There are also pools and fountains within the gardens, and we probably wouldn't be quite so keen on bathing naked with all these people around us playing music and serving us with food. But the part I like is a little pool at the front for the mother duck. She's got her beak open. You can sort of imagine going whack, 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 whack to all their little ducklings in order. These fountains do seem to be quite common in some of the larger gardens. This is a picture from Italy. We have people out in the garden singing, playing music, bathing in the fountain, much as people used to be allowed to do in Trafalgar Square on New Year's Eve. The fountain I would like to really be able to reproduce is this one, the Fountain of Eternal Youth. You're feeling a bit old and achy. You jump into this fountain and out you get back at the age of 33, which was considered to be the ideal age during the medieval period. This picture gives us a glimpse into a house, but if you take the steps out and follow the garden path, you pass a garden, it's enclosed with its topiary and its fountain, and then continue on to a little sort of what appears to be an island garden. And these have several records in England, but the best one perhaps is from Peterborough Abbey as it was at the time. This is the plan of a garden. It was cost a princely sum of £25, and it was put out to provide a garden away from the main cathedral area. So the Nen at the bottom has 2 canals dug into the side. This allows you to bring goods in from up the coast from places like King's Lynn. Much easier to travel and bring your goods by boat than it is to drag them overland. And you can see these double island gardens. This is a place for privacy. There are also fish ponds, and the alders can be grown on and then cut down because this is a wood that will resist wet. So it could be used for making your patterns for your feet, or perhaps even early forms of water pipes. And this garden still survives into the 1600s, shown quite clearly in Speed's map. It hasn't altered a great deal. If you look to the top of the picture, you can see the deer park. That certainly used to exist just outside the Abbey grounds in those days, but built over completely now. And the little area where it has a D, is roughly where Toot Hill is, the original Norman castle. There's a little man on the top right of the picture walking across a meadow, and this is an area still known today as a vineyard. Another form of water feature could have been found at Woodstock Park. This is Rosamond Bower as sketched out by Aubrey. It shows 3 consecutive little pools. If you visit today, you will only find one of them. Rosamond's Bower was said to have been built by Henry II to keep his mistress, Rosamond the Fair, said to be one of the most beautiful women in England at the time. He had to keep her enclosed and away from his wife, and some stories say she was kept in a labyrinth. Henry and his friends could get in and out so Rosamond could be fed. One day he leaves a thread hatching and he walks out. Eleanor, his wife, spots the thread, realizes she can now get to the fair Rosamond, grabs a knife and a bottle of poison, follows the thread in, confronts Rosamond and says, "Which one do you want to die by?" holding up the poison and the dagger. And according to the story, Rosamond chose the poison and then died. In fact, the story, though rather fairly romantic, is not true, because Rosamond actually became the abbess of the nearby Godstow Priory, and she did in fact die a natural death. The reason why there is only now 1 pool rather than 3 is that a certain Mr. Capability Brown had to enlarge the water area to create the Great Lake in front of what is now Blenheim Palace, and the other 2 pools are now underneath that somewhere. Rosamond had a rose named after her, the so-called Rosamundi, sort of a whitey, pinky striped rose, a little bit like a strawberry ripple ice cream. Sadly, this is not recorded in England or anywhere else much before the early sort of 1500s. Certainly in England, it's well into the 1500s, where it's said it's been discovered up in Norfolk, and it seems to be a completely new form of the rose. It is a sport or a natural offspring of the apothecary's rose. This is another form of that dropped pool arrangement. This is St Winifred's well at Woolston, just outside Oswestry. If you walk in from the right-hand side, you can see a little wall there. There's some steps. You drop down under the house. There's a little niche which now once again bears a statue of St Winifred, and the water flows out from the house over into another pool and then drops down and runs away to the bottom of the valley. Now, this is the Chocolate Box Ideal Medieval Castle. This is built on the proceeds of the 100 Years' War. It's Bodiam Castle. Originally, it would have been lime washed, and the original entrance and drawbridge is on the left-hand side of the picture. As we view it, you can see a little piece sticking out where it was. Nowadays, you would come in from the right-hand side. So we have to imagine now something that's rather like the Taj Mahal on a nice blue sunny summer's day. It's painted white, it's reflecting in the pool. It is now thought that visitors would have been brought in from around the far side and on a special track, so we'd have to actually ride or walk in all the way around the castle to admire its beauty and then cross over the drawbridge to get into it. So it was there mostly for show. By this period, once again, you could simply put castle cannon nearby and blow it to smithereens if you really wished to. Other uses of water in the garden are for fish ponds. It is probably one of the best pictures of a fish pond. The fish, of course, are being kept for food. They need slow running water constantly, so water won't get stagnant. The pools are not that deep, perhaps not much more than knee depth really, because you want to catch a fish. and you won't have many plants growing around the side because they make catching the fish more difficult. On the left-hand side of the pool, we can see a silt trap made of rods sunk into the ground and a piece that can be lifted up and down to control the water level and to drain the pond when necessary. Probably about every 5 to 7 years, the silt will be taken up and used as fertilizer on other garden areas. This is a pool from the Pope's Palace at Avignon. The whole room is painted with scenes of country pursuits, so there's hunting and hawking, but there's also fishing. So here we can see a pool. There's a man with a bandy net over his shoulder in the middle. Somebody else is draping a net over towards the right-hand side, and another man sitting on the side with a rod. Now, the picture's not that clear here, but one of the fish in the pool is distinctly a pike, which is something you would never ever do in a fish pond even today, because the pike would simply eat everything else in there. These are the fish ponds at Prebendal Manor. These are now known to be a later date, originally probably excavated to get out marl clay for fertilizer, and the medieval ponds are at the bottom of this area of ground and run across at least 2 other properties. This is a little table fountain, so it was thought at one point. It's from France, it's now in America. It is gilded, there is enameling, and you can probably see little bells and wheels. The original thought was this may have been set on a table at a banquet, and there would have been something under the table and probably somebody under the table pumping away to pump wine, possibly through it. The wine would come out the top, it would drip, pour over, it would spin the little wheels and cause the bells to ring. So it looked rather wonderful. It was in fact quite common through the medieval and to the period across many parts of Europe, where on a big festive occasion, towns would often have their fountains running with wine rather than water, so the inhabitants could celebrate. Probably not the best quality wine there. There will be orchards, obviously for the fruit that you need to grow. Orchards could also be areas where you would have walkways and places to go out in the summer months for shade. There will be trees covered in blossom in the spring to look beautiful. Later, the leaves give you the shade. In the autumn months, the fruit ripens. You then pick it and put it to practical use. As you can see, the trees are very high in that right-hand picture. There are no grafted mini root stocks in those days. The trees grow to a natural height. They don't seem to have any restrictive form of pruning in those days. So you simply have to go up to into the treetops with a ladder, probably quite a dangerous job at times, picking the fruit. The picture on the left-hand side is a cherry tree, and there are several pictures of cherry trees being scrumped by young boys. So some of the fruit you could find in your orchards, we mentioned apples and pears from the earlier plan. There will be mulberries, that's the picture at the top, rather like giant loganberries, black, juicy, and if you try to pick them, you will literally be caught red-handed because they tend to break up and get you covered in juice. The traditional way of picking them is to lay cloths on the ground and shake the trees, and the ripe ones will fall off. They were used to make wine and also dyes. The apples here are Coeur de Boeuf, an early 13th century apple. It can be used as an eating apple, but as mentioned earlier, mostly cooked or for use for cider. The plant bottom left is a quince, not the Japanese quince. This is the true quince. They can get very large. I weighed one off that was over 1.5 pounds once. And these were used to make the earlier form of marmalade before we start using oranges. If you've had marmello in places like Spain, one of those little plastic things with your breakfast, this is what the fruit, this is the fruit it was made from. It is very, very hard. You probably break your teeth actually trying to bite into this. So they're often cooked and pulped down. It can be made to make marmalade, which if you make it properly should set quite firm and solid. And you could also put this into molds, so you'd have various patterns and shapes, and it could be gilded as well, and you would eat the gold. It wouldn't be scraped off before you ate it. It's there for it to impress the guests. I made some of this and it kept for 15 years in a sealed plastic box. The fruit on the bottom right is a medlar. These don't ripen properly in England, except in exceptional summers. So they have to be left to blet, which means go semi-rotten. So you sort of pick them about the end of Octoberish time, put them into cool, dark, but dry barns and let them sort of go squidgy. Getting the squidgy bit right is actually quite difficult. They have a rather strange taste and they have very large stones inside. But the flowers on the tree are absolutely wonderful, so it's worth growing, if only for the flowers. There will be vineyards. Of course, the Normans bring over vineyards, but they had been here since the Roman period, and there were 36, I think it was known to be in England at the time of the Domesday Survey. In medieval times, the grapes could be grown in different ways. In the picture on the left, you can see they're being grown as little tiny freestanding bushes. I tried it at Nassington, the rabbits didn't give them a chance, but rabbits do not escape in England till probably into the 15th century. In Italy, they were still growing grapes, much as the Romans have grown them in one method, which is simply to grow them up trees. It's a woodland plant, so it's quite happy growing through trees. The biggest problem, of course, is that it's probably more difficult to actually pick them. So more commonly, they were grown up poles or up trellises. And at Nassington, we have a document that proves there was at one point a vineyard there, because £0.5 of pepper was paid for the rent. Now, this is probably where we originally had our own vineyard when we planted the medieval gardens out on the south-facing slope, very free draining, so nice and warm. And the grapes we were growing would actually ripen in England, although we found a lot of the time the birds got them before we did. Today, we tend to think of a peppercorn rent as something that's hardly worth bothering about. £0.5 of pepper in the medieval period would have been extremely expensive. Another form of rent was the rose rent. This is also recorded at Rockingham Castle, but down at Long Melford, you can find an effigy in the church of William Compton. He granted a guildhall and land for a market at a nearby town of Hadley and wanted a rose to be paid in rent every year. He dies and the idea is forgotten about until sometime, I think it was back in the 70s, when an American descendant wanted the rose rent to be paid once more. So nowadays, it floats a bit from what I can work out from the person at the church. They will hold a service and they will place a rose between the hands of Sir William Clopton, usually an artificial one, but at least they still pay the rent. And the rose they would have paid the rent with is this one, the apothecary's rose, the non-repeat flowering rose. So you get one big flush about 4 weeks. Marvelous as it is soon gone. The rose has a very strong scent, and the petals keep that scent when they're dried, making it very useful for potpourris. It was used to extract oil and rose water for cosmetics and medicines and cookery, much the same as today. And the rosebud itself originally has a symbolism of Christ, and later the bud of the rose that the lover is trying to find in the Garden of Love in the Romance of the Rose story. Now, there are also park-like gardens. This one shows another version of Eden, and according to Crescenzi, an Italian writer in the 14th century, you should have a parkland garden which is full of friendly animals. And this is a place you can wander, you can watch the animals feeding. There may be a summer house. He says if you're wealthy, you can have a summer house made of stone. If you can't afford that, it can be made of wood. And if you can't afford that, then it could be made of wood and canvas. So effectively, some sort of tent out in the garden for shade. And he says that the Lord and the lady can retire here to get away from the cares of the world. And if you're very wealthy, it could be 20 acres or more, and it would reduce in size according to your status in life. This particular picture, if you look to the right of Adam, has a rather shorn looking lion, but this is the Garden of Eden. So the lion lays down with the lamb, and the lamb still gets up in the morning. So we begin our life on earth coming from the Garden of Eden, and when we go to heaven, according to this illustration at least, this is what we can expect: yet another garden. Quite a few of the flowers are easily recognisable. There are iris at the back. You can see peonies at the front. Over to the left-hand side, St. Dorothy is plucking cherries. Dorothy is one of the patron saints of gardening. And cherries and strawberries, the only two fruits which were consistently eaten raw during the medieval period. And they were the fruits that you would be able to eat when you went to heaven. Mary is sitting reading her book. In front of her, the baby Jesus is playing a psaltery, and to the left-hand side, there's a lady taking some water from a little water feature using a spoon, which is commonly mentioned in some of the medieval romances. Whereas over on the right-hand side, we can see St. George, and down below him is a little dragon, which looks as if it'd rather have its tummy tickled than fight you. This was our pleasure park at Nassington. As we weren't that wealthy, it was quite a small area. There were cherry trees there, gorse bushes and roses for flowers and scent. And it gave you a pleasant place to walk on a hot sunny day. Crescenzi said you could also have aviaries in your garden to ensure there would always be bird song despite the season. And Hesdin was a garden in France, which had, according to the records, a rather spectacular house built over a lake, and inside there were automata. It was originally built by somebody returning from the crusade. The automata would produce thunderstorms and little monkeys who turned their head. This is very much the sort of thing you would not get again until Renaissance period. And sadly, the garden was completely obliterated during wars. A similar park-like garden can be found today at Fotheringhay. There is the major deer park of quite a few acres. This is close to the castle. So the right-hand picture shows you a view from the field just before the bridge. As you're coming from the Oundle side, you can see it is a nice rise of land, the last sort of real hill before you drop down into the Fenland regions, and parts of the double bank and ditches still survive. So these little parks are the ones that Crescenzi describes as being the places you could keep your friendly animals. This one was owned by the king, and the only other one in the county of Northamptonshire was at Brigstock, which was also owned by the king. And here we can see just about on a map, this is one of the earliest maps showing Fotheringhay Castle. So that red strip is the River Nen. In the bend just below the castle, you can see it's got an area marked as meadow. And above that, the lawn, which is shaped like a sort of stocking you'd hang up for Santa. And that is the little park. And I have followed that, and the outline still exists to this day. Deer parks, of course, were used for hunting as well as just looking at the friendly animals. There would be fish ponds and rabbit warrens too, and most of the locals would probably have access to these at certain times of the year for grazing and collecting firewood rights, and perhaps feeding their pigs with the fallen acorns or beech mast if appropriate. Sadly, the Fotheringhayes Deer Park is a bit overgrown on its border edges. So the bottom picture there shows just about, if you can see it through the undergrowth, a bank in the middle with ditches either side. And the banks, when they were fully grown, would have either had great hedges or perhaps paling fences, such as this illustration from Shalker. And according to many, the medieval period comes to a close on the 22nd of August, 1485, with the Battle of Bosworth. Our gardens never quite follow nice historical set dates. Henry VII himself was quite a keen gardener. He continues the medieval tradition of how gardening would take place, much as we've seen in these illustrations. Henry VIII continues gardening tradition, but with more ideas coming over from places like Italy and France, until we come into the full sort of not garden area, which we imagine the Elizabethan garden to look like with Queen Elizabeth herself. If you are interested in medieval gardens and the plants that were grown in them, you can look for both of these books online. Shop around for them, because you can find them cheaper sometimes than originally from the publisher Pen and Sword. But the Medieval Garden Plants one at the moment only recently come out, and Pen and Sword are giving £5 discount off the price. So that's the end of the talk.